Hello there guys, welcome back to I Can't Witch Without. This week it is I Can't Witch Without pine needles, not noodles but needles. And just a precursor to the video, like we always do, the I Can't Witch Without series is not to say that you cannot be a witch without any of the items featured. Be it herb, flower, tree, small furry fox. It's just my take on different things which I incorporate regularly into my witchcraft. So what we do in the format of this video is that we give two sources of reference, two book references if you like, that give their meanings for magical workings to do with, in this case, pine. We're also going to be talking a little bit about the tree in sort of a meditative focus. Now I have some of the cards that I wanted to further expand my workings with herbs and flowers and trees in particular. And then we're going to talk a little bit about my feelings and my experiences with pine in this case. Those sort of things might sort of sneak their way halfway into the video when it just seems appropriate, but that's the layout, that's how we address it. And I know we're a little bit late because I've been sick. I'm good now. Can you tell? Can you tell? Right, okay. So we'll start off with the Cunningham's Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs, which most people will have heard of. I'd be surprised if you hadn't. He's everywhere. Everywhere. When I find the pine. Okay. Gender masculine, planet Mars, element air, deity Sibyl, Pan, Venus, Attis, Dionysus, Astarte and Sylvanus. I'm not quite sure who Sylvanus is because Sylvanus just sounds like Sylvanus to me from Warcraft. Magical uses. Cones from pine trees are carried to increase fertility and have vigorous old age. A pine cone gathered on midsummer, retaining its seeds, is an awesome magical object, for if its possessor eats one pine nut from it every day, it will make him or her immune to gunshots. Please do not eat pine things and then go think you're invincible. Please don't. Pine needles are burned during the winter months to purify and cleanse the house. Scattered on the floor, they will drive away evil, and when burned, exercise an area of negativity. They are also they are also used in cleansing baths. Don't set your baths on fire. Okay. It's going to be one of those days. Pine needles are burnt to reverse and send back spells. Branches of the pine placed above the bed keep sickness far away. Or if they weren't placed in time, aid the sick. In Japan it was customary to place a pine branch over the door of the house to ensure continual joy within, for the leaves are evergreen. A cross made of pine needles placed before the fireplace keeps evil from entering through it. Pine is also used in money spells and as sawdust as base for incenses. So I do actually have some pine resin, but not very much in terms of incense making, and it's not. I need some more, so it wasn't enough to put in a bowl. It was like a tiny little bit, and I was like, oh, we're gonna be squinting if I get the pine resin out. It's like, what's that? It's tiny. So that's from the Cunningham book, and then we will read the references from the Magical Compendium by Paul Beryl. At least when Joe finds the page. There we go. Mars, Pluto, counter magic, herb of protection, herb of purification, invocational to Sibyl, Poseidon and Rhea. Lore. Pines have been considered by many people and some and are believed to be the sacred herb of the goddess Rhea. Some myths say that Poseidon used pine resin to seal the cracks of his boat and provide it with magical protection. Pine is a sacred tree in Asia, as well as... Pine is also a sacred tree in Asia. From the Luraisi world mythology, in primitive Shinto, the cult of trees, rocks and springs was celebrated in situ. The objects of worship and the place in which they were found were later surrounded by pines planted to form a sacred enclosure. It was only when such objects as jewels, mirrors and swords came to be used as symbols of the gods that the need arose to house them in a comparatively permanent place. In Greek myths, Attis was a young shepherd known for his beauty and romantic spirit. In one version of the myth, he fell completely in love with the goddess Sibyl, who is an aspect of the goddess Rhea, and when his passion was not returned, he castrated himself beneath a pine. Ouch! Temples to Sibyl were set near pines where her priests, known as Corbantes, lived, and sacred eunuchs who used music and dance to achieve states of divine ecstasy. Kind of threw me off that he cut himself. As usage. I'm in a funny old mood today. You have to get me out. It's full moon. I'm going loopy. Okay, usage. Pine needles may be dried and ground to be included in loose incense mixtures or made into pastils or sticks. The wood may be powdered or the resin dried and used as incense. Pine has the ability to cleanse a space of negative energy. It not only purifies but sends dark forces back to their source. Pine has a history giving it affinity for today's male priesthoods. It lends itself to male sexual energy, which has been removed from the procreative purpose. The sacred tree is ideal for those men seeking to bring their sexual drive under control and channel it towards sacred goals. The removal of one testicles is not a requirement. Good to know, I guess, guys. People who enjoy sailing might work with the protective magic of pine. Okay. And then we actually have the Scots Pine image from the Tree of Wisdom deck. And valued by the Druids, particularly at the winter solstice when bonfires of the trunks represented the return of the divine light. They would also decorate strands of the tree with lights. It is thought that some Scots pines mark the burial sites of ancient Scottish chieftains and warriors, while solitary trees further south were once markers of cattle droves and other important tracks. Medicinally, brain. The pine's resin eases lung congestion. And that, see, there's not an awful lot of information in the tree oracle deck, but there you go. So, for me, pine has always had this duality. It's always had an element of being very, very strong in wealth type magics, but it also has a really strong protective element, particularly surrounding the home, a purifying and protective element that kind of work into one, as far as I'm concerned. And I think there's something incredibly magical about the way that pine is tied into our modern consciousness. Now, for me, it's very evocative of memory because of its very particular smell. And pine is one of these really interesting things that a lot of people, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, I think, will have memories associated with pine. I have a few. I have some good and some less good. So in terms of natural pine, as in the tree itself and the scent itself, it reminds me of, obviously, Christmas time, when we actually had one or two Christmases when we had a real tree. And that's when we were really quite young, before the fashion of them having a faux tree came into more popularity and more accessibility. And it evokes memories of that time of year, of Yule basically. And a lot of the modern Yule incenses do contain pine or pine resin, kind of further evoking that memory, that connection to that time of the year. And that ties into the bringing back of the light with the winter solstice, so the sort of burning away of the negative into the purification element for me. Another thing is that I remember quite vividly going to a Euro camp in France, and it was in a pine forest, and the scent of it takes me back right there. Like, that's the first place it takes me. And it evokes a feeling of a little bit more connectedness to the wildness, to the wilderness, to the way nature can take us back. And there was something incredibly spiritual about that place that I didn't really twig onto at the time, because I must have been very young, and I was overawed by it. And I remember sitting as we got out of the car for quite a good while, and sitting and staring upwards at these incredibly large pine trees, and the smell was so strong and so refreshing and relaxing. And I think it might have been in quite a mountainous area. I think there was quite a fresh air type element associated with it. And it was an incredibly spiritual experience, and it's something that pine takes me there even to this day, and it has that incredible evocative scent that can really trigger memory. This being said, pine in its recreated form, as in the faux versions of pine, has the most revolting scent, and immediately makes me feel quite ill, because for one reason or another, pine fresh has become a hugely marketed cover-up scent to things that don't smell very nice. So it would be in bleachers and toilet cleaners and things of that nature, and those have a very arid undertaste and make you feel quite ill, or make me feel quite ill anyway. And unfortunately, pine in that sense becomes associated with those rather less than pleasant fragrances that can immediately make you feel quite ill. However, this pine smells incredible, and it has this beautiful natural lighter fragrance, and it's just beautiful. And the funny thing about this pine is that I thought to myself the other day, and if you're on Facebook you know this already, I'm running out of pine. Like pine needles. I was like, okay, I'll have to try and get some more pine. And I generally speaking can't get it wildcrafted. There are a few pine trees around the village, but they are quite solidly in other people's gardens, and hopping over the fence and grabbing their trees is not exactly something I am willing to do. But I had to go for a walk that day anyway, and it was on the day last week when we had some quite strong winds, and oh goodness, it was so beautiful. It was so breathtaking. And for me, pine and air have this interwoven relationship, as you can probably tell by now. And the wind was so strong and breathtaking, and I was walking along, and I was just my hair was flying back out and my clothes were flying back out, and I was just utilising the element of air the way that you may or may not do I would suggest you do as a witch, and that's using that strong gust of air to just purify you through and through and just invigorate you and make you feel more alive. And as I went on that walk, I came across all these branches of windswept treasure on the path, and it was very much like, oh, I need this, universe, here you go. And I obviously said my thank yous for these windswept treasures. I was so impressed. I was so happy as well. I was like, oh, that's awesome when something like that happens. It's great. So we'll have to talk about pine this week for I Can't Witch Without. Whew. I'm just sitting here smelling some of the rogue pine things that have been drying out. I've been drying them out on the dehydrator. The one at the far back might need a bit more going. It's not quite as dry as I would like it. So in terms of wealth and financial magic, I think pine works very, very well for it. I have just found it to be one of those herbs that, or herb/tree that really just works really, really beautifully and really, really well. In terms of purification and exorcism, it has an even stronger energy as far as I'm concerned. If ever I need to have a really heavy duty cleanse out, I've actually got a video already about this on the channel, then I will use a pine cone, and you sort of can incorporate further magical workings into it if you wish. You can anoint a pine cone with a little bit of purification oil. You can place other bits and pieces of herbs within the pine cone because it doesn't smell great when you burn it. So I quite frequently put like sprigs of dried rosemary in, or you can use some of the pine needles in themselves. And you place all of those into the pine cone and then in your cauldron, and then you light it, and it is the strongest, punchiest, deep smack in the face cleanse if you really, really need it. If you've had a in the house, like you heard about the Shinto and the sickness being cleansed out with pine. If there's been a lot of sickness in the house and you think it might have been caused by people maliciously causing that illness, if you think that it keeps building and building and building and you can't get a good deep cleanse out because you keep cleansing and then getting sick and it just keeps getting worse, pine cone in the cauldron is one of the easiest, most effective deep spiritual cleansing kicks that I have come across. There are others, but the pine cone is a really easy to obtain. I don't think many people would have too much difficulty getting hold of a pine cone. And of course it mixes air and fire. When you do the pine cone, you want the window open if you do it inside. I do it inside because it doesn't smell great. That's why I put certain oils on and rosemary and or pine needles and things to encourage the smell to smell a bit better, because it's quite arid. But it mixes fire and air, as we've already talked about. It's quite masculine, and the fire and the air in combination provide a real good sort of, the fire gets to burn off the negativity and transform it, and it is fed by the air magic, and the air then of course disperses and carries the purification even further. So the combination of the air and the fire work really, really well, and they just cleanse out and drive off and really get rid of it, it really does have a good deep cleanse. I don't know if is that it? Is that all we need to talk about in terms of personal? Oh, one more thing. The other thing is that I still have a couple of Virginian pine needles. Let's get one more thing on. And I've kept them on purpose. They were a gift from a lady called Dawn, and she sent me quite a few different things. She was very generous and sent me a box of things, quite some time ago now. I think we're talking a couple of years. I think it is at least a couple of years, right? So this is some dried Virginia pine needles. And I always, when things like this happen, when people send me things like this, I always try and keep one or two of them. And the reason for that is it's really symbolic of a deep generosity of someone else, and I want to honour that. Honour that memory of the kindness and generosity and the kind-spiritedness of others, especially in the act of giving. I think that it can be very important to honour the effort and the gift and the energy of the gift giving. And pine really actually works really well with the energy of gift giving anyway, because we associate it with Christmas, or however you modern day celebrate the energy of Christmas, whether it be Yule or Christmas or whatever. But it really is tied to the idea of gift giving and giving and generosity. This ties into the money magic of it as well a bit. The idea of abundance and gift giving and honouring a person for their gift. And that can tie into the Japanese culture of gift giving. There's a whole history of Japanese gift giving, and it's a very formal honorific process by which certain gifts are considered appropriate to honour a person, honour their energy. And pine really has that beautiful underlying gift giving energy. For me, anyway, this isn't something you will necessarily read in a book. This is how I feel about it. Again. And for me it has that it has that underlying theme, that underlying energy of being tied to gift giving. And you can see it in a multitude of ways. The pine cone is quite frequently given as a natural gift. The world of nature gives us this amazing gift of all its bounty, and the pine cone is no exception. It's this incredibly beautiful cone which a lot of us grew up learning about, and about how the open-close thing was a weather system and a weather prediction thing, supposedly. And it's just in popular culture, and it's in a lot of popular art, usually with squirrels for one reason or another. And it's in a lot of nature-based home decor, because it has this very pleasing aesthetic. And because of that, it gets all tied into gift giving. Quite frequently when you get given a wreath at Yule time, it will have pine cones on it. I've received gifts of pine cones on a number of occasions, and this occasion which I was talking about with Dawn, she also sent me some pine cones, and I've still got them, a couple of them, as in honouring the gift, keeping them. Also my dragon mama, who is like my sort of adopted mama, she sent me gifts of pine cones when I was going spare one year and couldn't find any. Like in nature I couldn't find any that year, and she sent me some, bless her. And these people have an effect on your life, and therefore keeping something, particularly something natural that someone has gifted you, is a way of honouring the energy they expended on the gift. It's sort of keeping you humble, keeping you honest, and keeping you in connection with the universe, because you are grateful, and therefore you resonate at a grateful level rather than a selfish level, or I don't know, an egotistical level. And that kind of, for me, ties back into the energy of pine again, because not only is pine so tied up in gift giving in my mind, but it also has that purifying element, right? So if keeping us humble and honoured and honouring the gift giving by doing these simple acts keeps us grateful and abundant within the universe, which are both energies which align really well with pine, it's also keeping us on a self-purified level. It's purifying out and making sure that we are good to those that are good to us. So it's like a return fold thing. And that energy kind of aligns up in with the energies of pine, as far as I'm concerned. It might be me, but that's how I feel about it. On a more very, very basic level, sometimes pine is considered good for wealth and things because it's sticky, particularly the resin. It's very much like honey in that respect, like everything sticks. So it's a sticky, gooey mess. Things are going to stick to it, therefore money will stick to you. So that's one of the other more interesting ideas about where abundance, money and wealth come from, to do with pine. So I think that's going to be it for today. I'm going to sit here and smell these pine leaves a bit longer. Many blessings.